When you are seeking to approach a designer, don't go into it just asking for a simple logo. Instead, actually do the brand exercise, bring that document to them, and that'll help them have a more accurate and targeted concept to turn back around to you. So it's going to be a faster process and it's going to be a lot more fun.
Every B2B marketing team faces challenges when they have to do more with less. Should you build skills internally? Should you find a freelancer? Should you search for the right agency? This is Tech Qualified, a podcast for the scrappy B2B marketing teams. In each episode, Meredith Metsker, a senior content leader at a tech company, and Justin Brown, a marketing agency owner, uncover how marketing teams generate qualified opportunities with limited resources. Every episode helps you get one step closer to winning over your ideal customers.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech Qualified. I'm Justin Brown, and I'm joined by my host, Meredith Metsker.
Hey, everyone.
This show is brought to you by New North. New North specializes in working with B2B marketers who have to do more with less. When you partner with New North, you turn your small, scrappy marketing team into a growth engine. One thing that's incredibly tough to manage for small marketing teams is a company's brand and what goes into design, if you do or don't have a design background, regardless. On today's episode, we're going to have two different ends of the spectrum. Elise has a background in design, whereas Meredith and I both do not. Both Meredith and Elise are on small marketing teams and have to execute regardless. Today, we're going to talk to Elise about how you can get scrappy when it comes to brand and design and redesign. Anyway, Elise, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've built brands from the ground up at 3 different companies. Can you walk us through your initial steps when starting a new brand building project as a one-person marketing team? I believe you've been one person at most of these places, but talk to the audience about some of your brand skills on small teams.
So just for clarity, I've been the sole marketing person at 2 different tech companies now, EasyPost as well as Qortex. And then the third company was one that I co-founded. And initially, I was the only marketing and design person, but eventually we did expand. That being said, my tried and true method to branding a company at any size or stage is really doing a comprehensive branding exercise where I personify the company and I think of them as a person. So before there's any design work done, it's really important to conceptualize what the brand is. And this should really be an aspirational concept. And a branding exercise is essentially a series of brainstorm questions that really help to define the brand's personality, voice, values, the promise. And I highly recommend doing this as a collaborative project where you either work with the entire company or at least a delegate from each business unit so that you have a different vantage point, whether it's someone that is external facing and talking to clients, whether it's an engineering team and they're thinking about the technology and how they're building it. It's good to get all those perspectives because that creates your cohesive brand.
Yeah, what are some of the questions that you ask to personify a business?
So I'll ask things like, how old is this brand? Where does this brand like to hang out? Who are some of their best friends? And these questions are very abstract. So I let the team know ahead of time, hey, this is meant to be a really creative process. And generally, whatever your intuition is, your gut, give me that answer. And that helps them to move away from the idea of trying to say the right thing and instead just thinking really conceptually, if this brand were a person, how would I want to interact with them? And that helped me to then define what the marketing strategy is in terms of how do I showcase our company to the audience.
Gotcha. Meredith, how old is UConnect if UConnect was a person? Gut instinct.
Technically, theoretically.
Yeah, metaphorically.
Metaphorically, probably someone in their 30s, 40s, mid-career, of course, someone in higher ed.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of it. Yeah, I think New North is probably 29 to 32. Marketer looking for their next job would be like director or VP role. I don't know. Where do they hang out? Dive bar type places? Is this the exercise, Elise? Am I doing it right?
So with the age question, what I'm really looking at is which generation do you align yourself with?
Mm-hmm.
And that early 30-year-old range is probably more millennial. So your company's probably thinking about challenging existing structures and thinking about prioritizing relationships over just goals and things like that. So it's interesting to see how that aligns. And then in terms of where you hang out at dive bars, that might mean that your copy, your tone of voice is much more casual. It's friendly.
Yep.
It's not buzzword stuffing, things like that.
Yeah, I just got off of a call. We just did a kickoff with a client that's a European company, been around for 70 years. They're in like insurance and risk management. They're in 200 different countries. I would say they're like 50, and they are, 50-year-old, probably male company. No, it's just it's a fun exercise
Wow.
to think about when you try to turn a company into a person.
And I would actually say for what you were just explaining, I think 70, 50 years old, I think that's closer to Gen X or like the boomer
Well,
generation.
the company is actually 70 years old. Like,
Oh,
they've been around for 70 years. I'm saying they personified, probably not 70,
I don't
probably
know.
more like 45 to 50, a little more serious in nature because of their industry being in insurance and risk management and trade. I don't know, all just fascinating to think about. I just was on a 90-minute call right before this, so it's a fun exercise.
And for that, I would say like trust is going to be a big thing for them. And so there's certain colors that evoke that, such as blue. There could be fonts that are a little bit more serious or clean in terms of, what they want to use for their typography. But all those little things get pulled in together to create the brand.
Yeah, I love that. We haven't done the like age thing before, but we have thought about certain characteristics that we want to be as a brand. We want to be professional, like we're offering good information, reputable information, but we want to have fun with it. So that always comes to light in content that I create. There's personality, there's a lot of me in it too, just because we want to be like, yeah, we're your partners, but we're not stuffy. We're not overly academic like some of the other vendors you might see in the ed tech space.
And to your point, Meredith, I think it's important for the team to see themselves in the brand. And I think that's also when you know you're headed in the right direction. If the brand feels very far off, it could point to the overall identity being maybe a little bit skewed or maybe not too aspirational, but a little bit off center. And it's good to reevaluate. It's really interesting to hear your take.
Yeah, for sure. One question that I was thinking of as you were talking a few minutes ago when you were talking about bringing in all these people or like liaisons from different departments across the company, how do you as the marketing leader take their input, get their opinions without letting it become a like decision by committee situation?
That's a great question. I try to keep it try to stick to open-ended questions. And again, I try to make it really abstract so that people just think of it as a brainstorming activity. In terms of not letting it be a committee decision, I think it comes down to me reading through every single response, and I give everyone a little packet to complete. And what I'm looking for is a common theme that's being tied across all of them. So I wouldn't say it's so much like the committee is deciding as much as I'm trying to distill and investigate what is the common thread here. And I think there is, as a marketer, a desire to, again, be aspirational. So maybe the team feels that our brand is really pragmatic. And they want to push us to be more innovative. And so trying to see like, where's our baseline and where would we like to be? Oh, I'm so sorry. It's a blend of both what the team is saying, as well as a marketer, where do I want to position the company? Where do I see our competitors sitting within the brand mix?
Yeah. Super interesting. And then when you are done with it, what do you do? I assume plug all of the inputs into Midjourney and create like a person. You're like, this is no. So what do you like? What is the deliverable that you show to the team to say, this is our brand, this is who we are? Is it short and sweet like that? Could be a fun thing to do after this. I'm gonna go into GPT 4.0 and be like, all right, here are all of the things that I think my company are, and create like a person. But no, what do you create? What is the deliverable out of this? How do you get buy-in from that? What is that process?
So I basically distill all this information and then I dial it down to 5 key personality traits that the brand has. And I write up what does that look like in our day-to-day function as a business in terms of how do we interact with our coworkers, how do we interact with our clients, etc. From those 5 personality traits, I also look at our brand values and see how those align. And then from there, I think about, okay, we are a brand that is innovative and we are pioneers. Are there certain colors that evoke? Are there certain shapes or graphics, icons, things of that nature? But in terms of the initial presentation, I'll put everything into a brand deck and I'll present it to the team just to show them what came from the branding exercise. Most people are really curious as to whether or not their answers were aligned with the rest of the company. And they're also just curious to see what comes out of the box. So I'll give you the example of Qortex, which was the most recent brand that I worked on. I was able to describe our gender identity, our tone of voice, our age, what our fashion looks like, where we sit between certain adjectives, and how we wanted to present ourselves. And something that really came forward was we want to be a company that is very much about networking, prioritizes that in-person relationship. And so that really steered us into looking a lot at conferences, at podcasts, at different speaking opportunities where we could really provide a human touch to our identity. But yeah, the first thing is really just showing on a clean deck what the brand identity is to the team. And then I take that same document and I provide it to a visual designer. And then from there, we decide what is the typography, the colors, the graphics that support this overall identity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And I want to get into that in a second about like actual execution, but I want to kick it to Meredith as well here. Meredith, you work on a small team, 2 people, right?
Yes, we are
I
down
ask
to
you
2
this.
now.
Yeah, I ask you this all the time. Okay, so 2 people. How is brand managed within your organization? If I know correctly, you're much more on the content side than on the brand side, which I think people conflate all the time, which is okay, especially when it happens at the leadership level and they're like, "Oh, you're content, you could do brand too." But I'm curious how brand is managed at Uconnect.
Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of the visual side of the brand, we worked with an agency to help us actually do a brand refresh a couple of years ago because our old brand just was very inconsistent. It was way too busy. It just didn't really represent what the direction that we wanted to go. So we did a total brand refresh, worked with an agency to do that. And now we have a freelance graphic designer who helps us implement the visual side of things. But in terms of like my role with content, we also thought hard, like I was mentioning earlier, about those like the personality traits, like Elise was talking about, those characteristics. And we knew that we wanted to, again, of course, be professional in tone and be credible, be authoritative. But we wanted to take more of a conversational approach to it. We're your colleagues, we're your fun colleagues, we're not like your boss talking down to you kind of thing. And so the way that plays out is, for example, we send a weekly newsletter and it includes 2 or 3 pieces of content from the last week or so. But the intro is always written by me. Like from my perspective, it's very much how I am in person is how I'm writing this newsletter. It's the same persona across this newsletter. I also host our podcast. I have the same kind of personality. I also manage our social media. It's the same tone of voice. Whenever we work with a freelance writer, I'm saying, hey, we really value a conversational tone. So you don't need to be overly polished, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's just how we approach it.
No, it does. It's super fascinating because depending on skill sets of small teams, and if you remember, Meredith, when we had our conversation with Tori, he talked about how his first hire would be a content person and a storyteller. And then we dug into it and we're like, that's because you're a technical marketer who has like skills in marketing ops and setting up sequences and working within CRMs. And so had he had a content background, he would have been looking for the person to do more things on the technical side. So it's always interesting to hear for you, Meredith, you had to retain a firm, go out and because you in-house have other skill sets. Whereas Elise, you're like, that's why you hired me, is to build this brand. We don't need to go out and get an agency to do these exercises. So before we get into how you're executing on brand, Elise, I want to just talk about what your current infrastructure is like in marketing, like what things fall. You're one person. I talked to you in our pre-call. I know you do a lot, but one person can still only do but so much. What do you do yourself versus what you go out and get people to help you with? What is that breakup in marketing infrastructure that you have?
That's a great question. So I am our solo marketer in-house currently, but I have plenty of help. So I have a marketing contractor named Tessa, and she helps me with all things content. And truthfully, she's been at Qortex the longest, other than our founder, Zach Rosenberg. So she has so much institutional knowledge in terms of how the product has evolved, how the company has evolved. And so when she's writing, she has such an informed point of view and she can really speak to the evolution, of video-based ads and can really talk about how what Qortex is doing is revolutionary and how we're going to continue to innovate as we go. So Tessa is definitely my right hand for all things content. And also she was really my shepherd into Vortex and understanding how marketing worked up until I got here. And then on the design side, I actually have two contractors. One is a visual designer named Bonnie, and she basically pulls ideas out of my brain and she puts them into Figma and she will actualize what I'm trying to say. And it's a really great relationship we have where I don't have the time to produce all of our graphics. I am able to give her the creative direction and she can actually actualize all of
Fascinating.
it.
So Meredith has content in-house, she's
Mhm.
content, and then is going out and getting the brand and design help, whereas you're the in-house brand design person going out of house to go get the content work. So a really cool just dichotomy of how you have resources in different places
Wow.
while still needing to leverage those resources as a small team. You still need to get it from somewhere. So
Yeah.
what are you typically working on like a daily basis in your role being more focused on brand and design?
It's a good question. I would say that I function more as a creative director when it comes to brand and design. And then also as, I would not call it an editor in chief, but I definitely have eyes and ears on any of our articles that are going out, any op-eds that we're doing, blogs, things of that nature. And I also want to mention our website. We have a website designer that helps as well. We build everything on Webflow. And the four of us, so myself and our three contractors, have a really collaborative process. And so we're all building upon each other. But in terms of day to day, I would say at this point, because we are about 5 months in and our brand has developed quite a bit, it's really on the execution of our creative direction in tandem with launch.
And Meredith, just to kick it over to you for a second here, I'm curious, what do you see as the downside and or benefits to having outside help on design? Like, how do you communicate? Do you like that it's ad hoc? Do you ever feel held back? What's it like not having that more skilled design ability in house? What's that like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. First off, we just really lucked out in that our designer is awesome. And it just so happened that, like, my boss and I had worked with this designer in a previous company. So we already knew him. We had a good rapport. Like, he knows I can give him a description and he can just visualize it and make it happen. It like blows my mind how designers can just create something out of nothing. It's amazing. But he also happened to be freelancing for the agency that we hired. So he was part of the brand redesign process and understood the root causes for why the design was the way it was. So then afterwards, he left the agency, we hired him on as a freelancer for us. So he already had that background knowledge, had already worked with us. He's very talented. So I think honestly, we found a unicorn in terms of a
Don't tell
freelance
anybody.
designer.
Don't tell anybody about your designer. Hold them tight. No, that's great. So, Elise, I'm curious when it comes to after you've built this brand identity, you've gone through your exercises, we know what the brand is about. How do you go about launching the brand? What are some of your steps you take, or do you have a process? Do you just do what you can while also, I'm sure, having opinions on the brand from people who have very obvious vested interest? I'm a business owner. I have a vested interest and I'm always curious what we're doing with our brand. So, how do you go about rolling out a new brand?
So I think there's the very tangible process of updating the website, updating your social headers and icons, redoing all your collateral. And those tasks are not just about how it looks visually. So I wouldn't say just a reskin, but really looking at the copy. Does the copy align to the brand that we would like to be? Is this our tone of voice? How we change our positioning? So it's really both the content and the design pieces coming together. And then I think separately, figuring out how you want to reintroduce yourself to the market is really important. And for Cortex and actually as well Easy Post, I got really lucky where we existed as a company, but not a brand. And so there wasn't a need to rewrite everyone's perception of who we were. Instead, it felt like we had a coming out party, or we were maturing into a new level or stage of our business. And usually what that looks like is just being more forward facing, whether you're doing op-eds or you're doing some amount of PR, you're trying to get speaking events, things like that, where you just have way more brand visibility. I find that's also part of the momentum that's being built. And I think when you have a brand that is really spot on to what your team feels that they're building, you just want to have the logo everywhere. And we often joke at Qortex that we're just going to have a step and repeat of our logo because we all just love it so much. And for us launching the brand last month, we've been, as much as we can, just sharing it in all avenues and channels and getting on speaking panels and whatnot.
What's next? I know with your background, it's like the brand is huge. It's a big piece just in my conversations with you. Where do you pivot now? You looking for a new job? No, I'm just kidding. What now that the brand is live? You've watched this thing that you
Mhm.
helped build and architect. Like, what is the next phase that someone who has more of a background in brand and design would move into with the organization?
It's a good question. I think because of the nature of my role, there's always been something other than the brand that I also have to work on, whether it's content or growth or PR. That being said, I think that creating new collateral is always going to be a task, and that does fall under brand marketing. But really, what I'm looking at now, and this falls in line with our identity, is really positioning ourselves as experts when it comes to video based content. So, really thinking about what topics make sense for a white paper. What do people want to look into? What research can we do based on our own data that we have aggregated? Just really rolling out the right content, I think, is the main thing for us. And again, I know I just spoke about the speaking opportunities, but making sure that we're able to position our thought leaders. We have quite a few within our leadership team, getting them out in the market and talking about the expertise that they have, as well as the key insights that Qortex is able to garner because we understand video content so well and continue to amass more data and are able to understand trends and just different strategies that people have when they're approaching video now.
Yeah. And Meredith, I'm curious how you all manage the needs for ongoing design for supporting content materials and things like that. Is that something you build into your ongoing efforts when you're writing a piece of content, writing a newsletter, creating materials? Are you doing that more yourself from templated brand materials that you're provided and you put them into Descript and you're pulling them out of there? Are you constantly collaborating with your designers? What is your ongoing ability to manage design and making sure you're keeping things on brand in line with the Uconnect brand?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a combination of both of the things you mentioned. So, first, like our freelance designer, I guess we have him on retainer every month. So it's just an ongoing relationship. And so we are typically assigning him new things every month. But any time that I can assign him something that can be templated, I'm going
Mhm.
to do that. And so he's very familiar with like the when we were going to launch our podcast, I said I need all of these assets. It needs to be delivered in a format where I can easily swap out the guest speaker photo, I can swap out the title, I can change colors. So he delivers those templates in Figma, makes it really easy for me to just change what I need to change. The same for webinars, header images for blog posts. That's typically where each one is different. Each one has a unique illustration. So those are a little more time intensive, but we feel that the effort is worth it. And we're typically only publishing about one new blog a month. So it's not that hard to keep up with that cadence. So that's how we manage that. Everything that can be templatized will be templatized.
I have a question for both of you. I'm curious how you're going to answer. How do you ensure that your brand identity matches up with the content that you create? I will start with Meredith on this one, actually, and then we'll go to you, Elise. So, Meredith, you have this brand rolled out. You're more of a writer by nature, and then you're creating video content with the podcast, all sorts of content that you're creating. Do you keep in mind the brand identity when you write using your tone of voice? Are you Meredith or are you writing for the brand's identity? Is the brand identity just Meredith Metsker now because you run all of content? How do you balance those things?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It is interchangeable at this point. There are definitely some pieces of content like the newsletter intro that I mentioned, like my style with hosting the podcast, that is definitely me.
Mhm.
But where it becomes more of like the You Connect voice is in like blog posts, social media posts. Like I'm posting from the company page in a slightly different way than I would from my personal page. But I'm guessing most of our audience knows that it's me behind the company
Yeah, at
posts
this
at this
point.
point. Yeah, and I think there's kind of pros and cons to having my voice and the company voice be so interchangeable. Like the pro is
Pro
that
can't get rid of her.
y-
You stuck with Meredith. She's the brand's voice.
there's some good job security in that yeah, for sure. And I will say it has benefited us a lot in terms of driving awareness, driving new sales. Like just earlier this week, this is like the coolest manifestation of our work so far.
Oh,
That I
brag
get,
incoming. I'm
yeah,
for it.
sorry,
Do it.
humble brag, it's
Yeah,
coming.
no, marketing is never given enough credit. Do it.
So I got an email from a guy I had on the podcast last year. He's a assistant vice president at a large public university. It would be a great get for us. And he was on the podcast at the time. I was like, you would be a great use case for UConnect, but they just weren't ready at the time. And so he emails me this week and he's, hey, can you do me a favor? Who should I talk to at UConnect about potentially bringing your technology on at my institution? You're probably wondering why I am not responding to sales emails that I get because I know I get them. It's because I trust you. Like I had a great experience being on the podcast. I know you're going to point me in the right direction. So that's why I'm reaching out to you. And he said that others in the industry spoke very highly of me and of UConnect. And I was like, oh my gosh,
That is
this could be a
awesome.
potentially great sized deal. And it's just so rare that you get that kind of feedback where it's like, oh, the marketing, the brand is
Did it.
working. They're picking up what we're laying down.
Yeah. No, that's great. Love to hear those stories, how much of an advocate we are for podcasting, and we use it like the ABM campaign that we run. It's how I got in touch with Elise. Like the ABM campaign we're running is we barely talk about our services. We are like, hey, boots on the ground. We have 5 podcasts as a business, and we're like, we want to go out there and just talk to everybody, get them to know us, trust us. We're the voice of small marketing teams. And our hope is calculated gamble is the more people that we get to know, the more people we engage with, have good conversations like this one, that those people will then come back at some point. So I just love hearing those stories, how much of an advocate that I am of podcasting. We have, 50, 60 B2B clients at this point, run podcasts for 90% of them. Love hearing those things. Elise, I'm going to ask you the same question, but in a different way. So
Okay.
you are architect of this brand. You've stood it up from personification of the brand. You rolled through all these exercises, and now you're leveraging external content people, whatever it may be. That's scary a little bit if I was writing for you, because I know you should, I would imagine, love what you built, right? Like you stood up this brand, the voice. How do you ensure that the people out there creating content for you are able to fit it within this brand that you've built, this voice that you want? Like, I'm sure you see it in your head. You're like, I know the way this sounds, the way this feels. But then how do you go and get people to then be able to deliver back to you what you're hoping for?
So I think there's two sides to the question. There's the art, and the science bit is very instructional almost. So with our brand personality, we are cerebral. So that means being data focused, having stats and metrics mentioned in our writing is really important, and being strategy oriented. So not just throwing out a bunch of numbers, but letting the audience know, what does this all mean? We also have curiosity as a personality trait. So presenting hypotheses, inviting ideas, and even discourse at times, just bringing an inquirer of opinions. And then industrious, we think about being a company that's prepared to scale and being really embedded in the industry. And what that looks like is talking about solutions that do or don't scale. And also, what is the state of the industry? So it's a pretty brand personality, I would say, which then lends itself to defining the tone of voice of our company. On the art side of things, our company is very chatty, and we're always talking through what's our strategy, how do we want to be seen in the market, what are we too early for? What are we right on time for? And so when it comes to even writing, doing drafts together, we're talking about different angles. And I think because we're so involved in the process, it's not so much about having control of the content. Rather, we are shaping the content together to make sure it's matching where we want to be positioned at this specific time.
Very nice. We are coming up on our time here. I have one last question for you, Elise, and that is I actually have a couple of questions, but the last major question on this topic specifically is what advice you would give to someone who is tasked with building a brand from scratch, or even if they're not tasked with that, lots of people we talk to are first marketing hire. They're handed a whole bunch of things, in many cases, brand refresh, website relaunch. That's like right there when they walk through the doors as like one of the first things that they need to do. What advice would you give to a person who's in that situation?
So I would say the first thing is have a mood board. Figure out what you like and don't like and try to see a pattern as to why and how it relates back to, your company. And I think the key thing with branding is to remember that the resources you need are ideas, which come from you and your team, and direction, which you actually provide yourself when you do a brand direction. And if you have a designer to act on your brand identity, that's great. And if not, having the direction that you've already defined yourself based on the ideas from your team, that means you at least can figure out, okay, what's our tone of voice or how do we want to be positioned? And you can slowly build into the visual identity. And with that piece, I would say when you are thinking to approach a designer, don't go into it just asking for a simple logo. Instead, actually do the brand exercise, bring that document to them, and that'll help them have a more accurate and targeted concept to turn back around to you. So it's going to be a faster process and it's going to be a lot more fun. I would also say to make sure you ask not just for their portfolio, but their process. And you want to make sure you're working with the designer who understands the language that you're speaking. And I don't mean just the actual language. They're collaborative. They understand what you mean when you want something to maybe be more bold or maybe softer. You want to make sure you can have that conversation. And then the last thing is don't be afraid to sketch things out. So everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of people like to say that they're not a designer, they can't draw. And I wouldn't say that you have to be a great illustrator or artist, but rather sketching things out will help you to start to visualize what you are trying to say. And I think it just helps the creative juices.
Yeah. A couple notes from me on that. Actually, I work with a lot of designers. My business partner does design for us a lot, or at least is the kind of creative direction behind the design that we do for ourselves and for our clients. So I have two pieces of advice that I would give to people when they're working in design without a design background or with a design background. One is samples. Samples are your best friend. Go find things that you like. You don't have to be an art. You don't have to be a designer at all. Go find other work out there that, not telling you to go rip anything from anybody, but every artist on planet Earth has found inspiration from other things that they have consumed that they like. And when you're going to work with a designer, if they're building something from scratch for the first time, we do this all the time. All these podcasts that we create, like the cover art and the look and feel of them, all comes from, okay, my first question is like, is there any cover art out there that you like? Can you show it to me? Do you like big block letters? Do you want your face on your podcast? Very simple things there, but any design, bringing samples is incredibly helpful. I have two more actually. Another thing is if you don't like something from a designer, don't just say you don't like it. Say what can be improved. Use those samples, like I said up front, to say, hey, you went this direction with this. I actually don't love X, Y, and Z about it, instead of, it's just not really us. Like, what us is incredibly difficult to work off of. And then the final thing that I would say is you were talking, Elise, about having, what you would be looking for in a designer that you're working with. One thing that I really enjoy is when a designer has rationale for what they create. They didn't just create pretty colors that work and they're your brand. But hey, so I saw a cover art that my business partner Tristan did the other day for his show that he's rolling out called Creative Operations. And the top half of it was like pie charts and line graphs and whatever. And then the second, like on the bottom right of it, is like some illustration and some shading that looks like it was done with a pencil. And he's like, that's the two sides of the brain. That small thing to just say, hey, this just came from somewhere. I think does have that next layer of value that you mentioned, Elise. It's okay, cool. You had something in mind. It wasn't just, I threw together a logo. I used your Qortex. I used a C and it looks like, I don't know, I'm just making something up. I know this is in your logo, but it looks like Pac-Man. I'm like, why Pac-Man? They're like, I don't know. It's just a C. I was coming up with a C. Yeah. But see, if they'd said that, I'd be like, all right, cool. At least you had some rationale there. So those are my I work with designers all the time. I don't have a design background. Those are things that I've seen help me a lot or that I really appreciate.
Yeah. So I will add that's super helpful for any writers you might hire to create content that aligns with your brand as well. Take the time to give them feedback. Like I have been a freelancer for a company before where the CEO reviewed an article I wrote and he was just like, I don't like this part. I just don't like it. Not good. And I was like, first off,
Too broad.
I'm a very experienced writer. I can guarantee you it's not bad, but maybe it's just not aligning with what your expectations were. Let's talk about it.
It might even be, I think it's actually harder for writing when we deal with these kinds of things than we do for visual content and design. Because I'm able to, with design, I throw it in Frame.io. I'm like, draw on it. I don't care. Click on it, draw on it. Show me circle in red what you don't like. But in writing, it's almost like when people have feedback or change, I'm like, just change it yourself. Like, just change the words. You have the ability, like you telling me that this doesn't feel like your brand is very difficult to then change like a whole tone of voice of a piece. In many cases, you're really essentially having to do a complete rewrite.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you're like, okay, well, you just don't like it the way I wrote it. So now I got to I can't I'm not going to change 10 words and all of a sudden it's going to have a whole different vibe to it. You got to go through essentially a rewrite. Anyway, Elise, this is the last question for you. Where can people go to find you, Qortex? Where do people go?
So you can find me at Allys at Qortex.ai, and I'm going to spell it out because it's a little different. It's ALYS at QORTEX.ai. I think I did that. I'm also on LinkedIn, and if anyone actually needs a sample brand exercise, I can definitely send you my framework, and it's definitely something that, like I said, has been tried and true, and I'm happy to share that resource with everybody.
Oh, I want to see that resource. I want to do it for myself, just for fun. And there you go, Qortex with a Q. I said a C. The C really would have made no sense. Okay. All right. On that note, Elise, it was great having you. Meredith, as always. And this was Tech Qualified. Look forward to having our audience here for the next episode.
Thanks for checking out Tech Qualified. This show is brought to you by New North, a marketing agency that helps turn your small, scrappy marketing team into a growth engine. To find out more about New North or check out more episodes of this show, go to newnorth.com/techqualified.